Hello and welcome to Focus on Gaza, a new weekly show which will provide insights into the lives of ordinary Gazans and analysis of the big issues affecting them. I'm Imran Garda. The war on Gaza claimed over 1,300 lives, including over 400 women and children. The Israeli military has consistently denied that it targeted civilians during the war. But as Al Jazeera discovered in this exclusive investigation, there is compelling evidence to suggest that innocent people were deliberately killed. Ayman Mohyeddin, who was in Gaza throughout the war, uncovers some startling revelations.
In 1949, the newly formed state of Israel, many of whose citizens had been victims of Nazi war crimes, signed the Geneva Convention on the Protection of Civilians in time of war. But in Israel's war on Gaza, there's compelling evidence to suggest that these noble sentiments were ignored and that the Israeli military disregarded the laws of war. Throughout this investigation, we have gathered compelling testimonies from eyewitnesses, victims' relatives, neighbors, and human rights experts. Time and time again, we've been told the story of a woman carrying a baby and a white flag being shot in the head in broad daylight by an Israeli soldier. And all of the people that we've spoken to have concluded one fact: the village of Khoza was a scene of a war crime. All that remains of Rouhia al-Najjar, the 37-year-old mother of Hiba and wife of Nasser, is the photograph taken for her recent pilgrimage to Mecca. A native of Gaza, she had lived her entire life through conflict, and her life was to end on the 13th of January 2009 in an act of war.
For 2 or 3 days before that day, they had been firing phosphorus bombs randomly, but they weren't targeting our neighborhood. They were actually firing from here. So we could see the bombs flying over our heads and falling in different areas.
This substance, which burns on contact with air, can legitimately be used as a battlefield smokescreen, but had allegedly been used here as an instrument of terror against the local population, setting fires to homes and people. Barefoot children still burn themselves on the phosphorus, which was dropped in vast quantities the night before Rouhia's murder. Just as the men are eager to show us phosphorus shells that landed in their fields, children compete to demonstrate just how lethal the properties of this strange new weapon are. When we warned them of the dangers of picking up the phosphorus, one small boy asked us, "What does it matter? We are all already dead." A sense of fatalism brought on by experience. White phosphorus may have become infamous as a result of its use in Gaza, but it was by no means the only weapon at the disposal of the Israeli military.
We used to think that this area is safe because there were no resistance fighters here. They used to bulldoze farms and agricultural lands and then leave. We didn't expect them to demolish houses. We didn't expect this extent of criminality.
In Khoza, the villagers were used to living under the guns of the Israeli watchtowers, and in the first 2 weeks of the war had become accustomed to the artillery and airstrikes. But the night before Rouhia's murder, it became clear that this was something different.
We thought at first it was the usual firing of bombs overhead, but then my neighbor Rawhiya started calling me. She was shouting to us that our homes were burning. We went out and the smoke was like fog covering everything. Every house received their share of phosphorus bombs. Rawhiya was trying to put out the fire at her house and other neighbors were doing the same. Then she told me, "Hurry up, your house is on fire." I ran to the house, but it was all on fire.
The shelling was considered a precursor to a ground attack, so Rawhiya's husband Nasser, along with many others, decided to leave the area, fearing the men in the village would be taken prisoners by the Israelis. He tried to persuade his wife to join him.
She said she doesn't want to leave her house, and that if she was going to die, if they were going to kill her, she would rather die in her own house. She said the white flags represent peace, so they won't harm us. But they didn't respect the white flag.
Their daughter, Hiba, chose to stay with her mother and to help look after the house and those wounded in the attack.
When they were done putting out the fire, our neighbours started coughing because the phosphorus emissions were suffocating him. So my mum grabbed a towel and soaked it with water because we had been told that water helps.
The special forces had taken the high building and alleyways while we were putting out the fires. They later told the prisoners they took that we saw you trying to put out the fires, but we didn't see you carrying any weapons. They told them that if you had been carrying weapons, we would have wiped you out.
Khuza' was shut off from the outside world. To the east, tanks and bulldozers. To the west, Israeli special forces. The villagers, now mostly old men, women and children, sheltered together in larger houses, but neither the size of the buildings nor the white flags were to offer any protection.
The sun had not yet come up. It was still early when we heard our neighbor scream. So I shouted, "What's wrong?" And she said, "They're demolishing the house from the front while we are still inside."
And then they reached the wall of our house. So we tried to escape from the window. We all escaped and gathered in this empty square behind me.
As the bulldozers began to level the houses, Iman's 16-year-old brother Muhammad was taken hostage by Israeli soldiers. They led him to the opposite end of the main street, where he was bound and blindfolded.
The place where you are sitting now was originally a staircase, but they leveled it and placed a mattress on it. Then a soldier laid down on his stomach here. I was hearing everything that was happening, and when they were taking me to the toilet, they took off the blindfold and untied my hands so I could see a few things.
The soldiers seemed relaxed, singing to pass the time and forcing their hostages to do the same.
They asked me to sing along with them, but I refused. They were still talking to me in Hebrew, but one of them was translating, and he said to me that if I don't do what they ask, they will kill me. So I did what they asked. I started to sing with them until they retreated.
It was now 7:30 a.m., and at the opposite end of the street, bulldozers and tanks were leveling the houses.
They were destroying them like you crush a matchbox. And we stood there watching. The soldier that was in the bulldozer was laughing. He was chewing gum and laughing. He turned the head of the bulldozer towards us in a playful manner, as though he was telling us, "You're all going to die."
We all gathered here, but then the bulldozers reached the walls of the house here that was right next to us. So we started to escape. Just before that, the Israelis had gathered the men and told them that we had to evacuate the area within half an hour. But it seemed like they hadn't spoken with the special forces.
Increasingly hemmed in and fearing for their lives, around 15 of the women and children